Okay, tonight is the 9th day of Adar. It's a day when the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe came to America, and it is a day of tremendous celebration. The previous Rebbe said when he came to America that America is not different. Don't think that America is different than Europe. Don't think that you can't keep Torah the same way you kept it in Europe. America is not different. And the previous Rebbe said about Americans, I have meditated into the American spirit, into Americans, and I discovered that Americans, because of their sincerity, they are very good vessels for the light of chassidus. I had the great privilege of studying from my great uncle, Ein Gesund, Rabbi Shmuel ben Chai Rivka. I want to dedicate our story tonight to him. Refuah, Kreva, Shleim, L'chaim, L'chaim, V'racha. There was a chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek and the Mittler Rebbe, who I mentioned in the previous story about the Shmuel Bezalel Shaftel. And he has an incredible story, and it's on that same theme of sincerity. He was a very sincere and special person. And in the spirit of the 9th of Adar and the power of the Friedrich Rebbe's arrival to America, which transformed not just American soil to be a place of Torah, but from America, the Friedrich Rebbe reached out the entire world and changed mamish. This was a day of a new revelation of Torah throughout the world. I'm going to share an incredible story about sincerity, about Rabbi Yitzchak the Tailor. Rabbi Yitzchak the Tailor's grandfather, his name was Rabbi Meir. And Rabbi Meir was a very prominent, wealthy person, wealthy Torah scholar. Stop this, Rosie. His mouth never stopped saying words of Torah, and he wanted all of his children to follow in his ways, of course, and all of his children married very prominent families. But Rabbi Yitzchak, one of his sons, Reb Avram Shmuel, one of his sons, did not Reb Avram Shmuel, one of his sons, did not want to marry into the ritzy, prominent families. Instead, Reb Avram Shmuel wanted specifically to marry into a simple family. He didn't want to have the hoo-ha of the more prominent families, and he wanted to study Torah in secrecy. Not secrecy, but humble. And one of the problems with truly great people like Baruch Neufeld is that truly great people don't know their own greatness. That's a problem. Truly great people are not aware of their greatness. But anyways, Rabbi Shmuel, that was his request from his father. He said, I don't want to be in these prominent families. I want to marry into a family of a simple villager. So there was a simple villager who lived nearby, lived a few miles away, whose name was Rabbi Yosel Baruch Hu Baruch Shemai. The reason he was called Rabbi Yosel Baruch Hu Baruch Shemai is because he always would say Baruch Hu Baruch Shemai, blessed is he and blessed be his name. He would always wash his hands or clean his hands, and he would say Baruch Hu Baruch Shemai, blessed be Hashem, blessed be his name. When anyone would speak to him, he would always answer Amen. And someone asked him, why do you always say Amen? So whenever someone speaks to him, they would say Amen. He said because he once heard from a traveler that Hashem, blessed be and blessed be his name, is always with us. And Amen stands for the words Kael Melech Neman. How Hashem is a king who you can trust. Very good, Rose. So that's what Amen means. So Rabbi Yosel, heard that Meir's son, Avram Shmuel, wants to marry into the family of a simple villager. So he sent the school teacher for his children to go to Rabbi Avram Shmuel and ask him if perhaps if Meir would consider his daughter for his son Rabbi Avram Shmuel. And they agreed, and this villager agreed to support Rabbi Avram Shmuel for 15 years, and he could study Torah. And Rabbi Shmuel moved to this village, and sure enough, he was supported by his father-in-law for 15 years. When he first came to the village, he was happy to study Torah, and he's happy to have this quiet life that he wanted. but he was bothered because there was no minyan. There's no minyan. There's no group of people praying together, except for Shabbos. But as soon as he got there, he told the people in the town most of the people in that town actually came from families who had studied Torah when they were younger, but now they're living in this town because of reasons of earning their livelihood, and they weren't so into Torah learning. But he said, guys, Shabbos, let's learn Torah together. And he created an environment and a spirit of Torah learning. There were 3 boys in that town who were studying Torah there, and he offered to teach them. He himself was an incredible scholar at Rabbi Shmuel. And he offered these 3 boys to come study with him, and he would, and in exchange for them trying to create a minyan. And eventually, the town grew, and after a while, more and more people moved to this town, and they built a shul, and they had a minyan there. And he would go. His father-in-law, Rabbi Yossel Baruch Shmei, had a little factory, about a mile away from the city, and he built a home for his daughter and son-in-law right next to the factory. And that's where his son-in-law was very happy, peacefully studying Torah for quite some time. And the end of the 15 years was coming to an end. And his father-in-law said, listen, I'm going to continue supporting you, continue studying Torah. But he said, no, I want to earn my own livelihood. I want to start doing something myself. And he learned how to, remember what he learned how to do, Rosie? He learned how to become a tailor. And you know what he made? What was the first thing he made? Remember? He made sacks. He made sacks. He was a tailor. He made these sacks to hold produce, to hold merchandise. And that's what he did. And while he was sewing these sacks, he would say Gemara and Rashi and Tosfos by heart. He knew so much Torah, he was constantly saying Tosfos and Gemara by heart. Anyways, he eventually went with his wife, and they moved to the city of his youth, where he came from, the city of Shvensian. When he came back to Shvensian, the older people in town had already passed away, and the younger people in town didn't remember him. And so he didn't really know anybody. He was and he wanted himself. He appreciated solitude, and he appreciated being alone. And he studied Torah there and continued his job, but he saw very quickly that there was no market for his business of making bags. And so he started to do something else. What did he start doing instead of making bags? He started making suits. So he was a tailor making clothing, maybe made shirts too. He made clothing. And people knew about his scholarship. They came across that he was a scholarly person. Many actually invited him. Many traveling scholars who had met him offered him to become a rabbi of different towns, but never wanted to become a rabbi. Instead, he wanted to be a tailor, and he would diligently continue in his craft of being a tailor. So Rabbi Shmuel and his wife, one thing that bothered them to no end was that they had no children. And he had decided, as was customary in those days, people in those days would try to inflict themselves with gullus. They would go and just wander around and hope that this self-mortification, fasting and not having a place to stay, would arouse God's mercy and open up the doors of heaven for blessings. He asked his wife permission to wander around, so that he should, in that merit, Rosie, you got to stop that, okay? In that merit of wandering around and having a little hardship, in that merit, he should be blessed with a child. But before this happened, there was one man whose name was Moshe Gedalia. Moshe Gedalia, his livelihood was he would do business with various noblemen in the area, and he would buy produce, and he had a very large family. Rabbi Moshe Gedalia had a very large family, and things were really hard for him, but he would buy produce from various noblemen, and he would sell the produce. But because he couldn't really afford to invest in this business, he always had to sell at a very low margin. And he had a very hard time, especially because it's so many expenses because of his large family. So he would buy and have to sell very quickly and with a very low margin. And he needed to get a suit because all the noblemen were telling him, we can't do business with you anymore because you're walking around like a schnook. And now you're not dressed appropriately. You have to get a nice suit. We can't talk to you even. So he realized he has to do this. So he went to Rabbi Shmuel, the tailor, and he said, can you make me a suit? He said, sure, I'll make you a suit. And how are you going to pay me? He says, I can't afford to pay you, but I really need this. So how about I'll make you a partner with me in the business, and that way you'll be able to get paid, and I'll have a suit. He said, I don't want to be. Rabbi Moshe didn't want to be a partner with him, and he needed a suit right away. So he told Rabbi Moshe Gedalia, listen, I have one of my own suits. I'll give you one of my suits. I'll fix it to fit you, and you'll pay me as much as you can, as things go, as we go along. So Moshe Gedalia took his pillow. What did he do with his pillow, Rosie? He sold his pillow, and he got a quarter of a ruble, and he gave as a down payment for this suit that Rabbi Shmuel Tailor gave him. He gave him a quarter of a ruble, and he got this suit that belonged to Rabbi Shmuel, and he would go and he went around to the various noblemen to as he was doing before. But all of a sudden, when he started wearing this suit, and after he got the bracha from Rabbi Shmuel, things changed. The noblemen who, stop, Rosie, please. The noblemen who were always very stern with him and didn't want to give him too much credit, they opened up the doors and they said, you could have as much credit as you want, you can pay as many terms as the terms that you want. And this happened again and again. And he started becoming very wealthy because he was able to get these favorable terms for the merchandise and sell it whenever he was able to. So because of that, he became very, very successful, very, very rich. And of course, he no longer needed the suit of Rabbi Shmuel, and he got another suit. And he became known in Shvenzian as a very wealthy person. But as soon as he switched the suit, he noticed that his success stopped. And his wife told him he did a foolish thing. You should keep that suit. You got that suit from that special rabbi. Put that suit back on. And she looked for it, and she found that suit, and she washed it and cleaned it, and he put that suit back on. All of a sudden, the success returned, and he realized that Avram Shmuel was not just a regular person; he was a tzaddik, and therefore he was wearing just like the Gemara says about Iyuv. Anyone takes a coin from Iyuv is blessed because Iyuv is such a great tzaddik. So he realized because he got this suit and this blessing from this tzaddik, there's a certain blessing in wearing that garment that belonged to the tzaddik. As many people have a custom that they wear a garment from a tzaddik, like on a wedding, you wear a shirt that belonged to a tzaddik, and so he felt that there was merit, and his wife felt that it was a merit of this garment that had been made by Rabbi Shmuel that he was so successful. And his wife she shared with her sisters-in-law and with her sisters about this incredible occurrence that her husband wears a suit and he's very successful, and it's amazing. So one of his brothers-in-law, Baruch Shalom, he wanted to get the same suit too. So Rabbi Shmuel said, I can't make you a suit because I'm about to leave on this gullus, about to go and travel around and wander around. I have no time to make a suit. But he begged him, and he said, please, if you make me a suit, I would really appreciate it. Finally, he agreed to give him one of his own suits and just fit it to him. And he got the suit, and guess what, Rosie? He gave him a bracha, and sure enough, he started being successful too. He had a third brother-in-law, whose name was Reb David. Reb David was ridiculed the whole thing. And this story is from the previous Rebbe's writings in Hatamim. First part of the story is printed in Hatamim. The second part of the story was just discovered more recently, in the last 20 years, just found in the previous Rebbe's writings, the end of the story. So he gave the suit to Baruch Shalom. Baruch Shalom was very successful as well. And then he went off in exile. And he didn't want, he kept on with his business of being a tailor while he was in exile. And he kept on selling the suits in exile, and while he was traveling, he met a certain tzaddik named Rabbi Mordechai. It's possible, the previous Rebbe doesn't say who the tzaddik was. The second part of the story was printed in the Kfar Chabad, and it printed in the English book, I think it's called Links to in a Chassidic Legacy by Rabbi Shimon Newborn. It's also, you can find it online at Chabad.org. Okay, Yitzchak the Tailor. Anyways, so he met a certain tzaddik named Mordechai. It's possible this is the same Mordechai Bayever that the previous Rebbe writes about in the long letter he wrote. I think you should go to Mami now. Okay, go wish Mami a good vach. So Mordechai was also traveling around, and they traveled together. And he noticed that Mordechai, although he was traveling, so to speak, in exile, he didn't do what other people did. He had a few things he noticed about him that were very peculiar in this society of those who would go in exile. Number one, that Mordechai would spend a long time praying, word for word, and then when he studied Torah by heart, and he would just whisper the words of Torah, he wouldn't say them out loud, and he never did any fasting, he never did any self-mortification, as Rabbi Shmuel would fast, and I don't know what other means of self-mortification he would do, and torture as a means of cleansing himself and purifying himself to evoke God's mercy. But he noticed that Mordechai never did any of that stuff. But they would travel together. And one day they were in the field together, and Mordechai says that he wants to go and immerse himself before praying mincha. His custom was, whether it's winter or summer, he would always immerse himself in the water as a customary before prayer to achieve a higher level of purity before prayer. The Zohar says, I pray, the Zohar says, to the one who has a nose, which means that God is, so to speak, sensitive to our purity of thoughts and feelings, and therefore it's customary for many people to immerse themselves in a mikveh to purify themselves before prayer. So in Mordechai, he had a custom, not just immersing himself before the morning prayers, he would immerse himself before every prayer. And he told this his colleague who is traveling together with him, he's going to immerse himself in the water. And he's left his knapsack with him, and he goes to immerse himself. And Reb Shmuel says, I want to do the same thing too. I also want to immerse myself in the water. I'm hot, I want to go in the water too. And he sees Mordechai taking off his clothing, but there's no water around. And he's like, what's going on? So Mordechai says, go 10 steps that way. Okay, goes 10 steps that way. And when Mordechai comes back, he's all wet. And there's no water. He can't believe what's going on. So he asks Mordechai, how in the world did you go? Where's the water? So Mordechai said to him, says in the Gemara, if someone wants to become pure, God assists him. Since he wanted to become pure and he wanted to purify his prayers, so God brought water from deep within the earth and brought it to the surface so that he should be able to immerse himself in prayer. After that happened, Reb Avram Shmuel started paying more attention to this Reb Mordechai. He started copying him and learning from him more. Reb Mordechai offered to teach Reb Shmuel the teachings of Kabbalah, but he refused. He said that, listen, I have to go home soon. I told my wife that I'm going to go in exile for a certain amount of time. Now time for me to go home already. And therefore, if I start learning Kabbalah now, I won't be able to properly get an understanding of it anyways. So why should we start something that I can't finish? And Reb Mordechai said, okay, but I want to tell you 3 pieces of advice. The first piece of advice is, God willing, you'll have a child and you name him Yitzchak. The second piece of advice is, never get involved in an argument. And the third piece of advice is, if a lot of people ask you for something, you should try to help them. That's what he told him. He took these 3 pieces of advice very seriously. In fact, later on, Reb Shlomo Rafals, who was a great opponent he later became a chassid of the Alter Rebbe, but at first he was a detractor of the Alter Rebbe, and he was part of a group of rabbis that issued a ban against the Alter Rebbe and against the Chassidim, and he wanted Rabbi Shmuel to sign the ban. So although Rabbi Shmuel personally was not a chassid himself, but since Rabbi Mordechai had told him never get involved in an argument, so he did not. He said it's possible they deserve a ban, it's possible they don't deserve a ban. I'm sure the rabbis involved will have to make the appropriate research. But I, because of this passing, because I once was traveling with this tzaddik Rabbi Mordechai, I know that I personally should not get involved in this thing, and therefore I cannot sign. Anyways, so after he goes on this long exile, he returns home to the city of Shvensian, and he comes back home, and his wife told him that everyone in town is talking about Reb Shlomo Falls. Different story. I know about Rameir Falls, Reb Shlomo Falls. Anyways, so after he returns home, his wife tells him that there are a lot of people who are talking about the suits that he made and the wonders that they're associating with his blessing and the wonders they're associating with the clothing that he made. And Reb David, who was a brother-in-law of the first guy I mentioned, Rabbi Moshe Levin, he right away came to his house and he said to him, "Can you please make me a suit? I heard you're a tailor." And Rabbi Shmuel was as I mentioned before, he liked his solitude, he liked the quiet, he was a very humble person. He didn't want people to say what kind of great miracle he was. So when Moshe Gedalia had first been blessed by Rabbi Shmuel when he got the suit, and his brother-in-law Rabbi Shalom also had the suit. The third brother-in-law, Reb David, first ridiculed this, but now seeing the success of his two brothers-in-law, as soon as Rabbi Shmuel came back to town, he's like, "Hey, can you please make me a suit?" But Yitzchak the tailor said, Rabbi Shmuel the tailor said, "I'm sorry, I cannot make you a suit. I don't make suits anymore." He decided to change professions, and instead of making suits, he started working instead with fixing pots and pans. Now, people in town spoke about him. The word of his blessings and the word of his miraculous powers reached the governor of that city of Shvensian, who was not Jewish, of course, but he was very friendly to Jewish people. And when he heard about this special rabbi, he wanted to get a suit from him. So he sent a royal carriage to pick up Rabbi Shmuel. And his wife sees, this royal carriage outside her home, and she tells her husband, and her husband comes out, and they say, "Well, the governor wants to speak to you." He says, "I don't go in royal carriages. I'll walk." He walks to the palace of the governor, and the governor says, "Can you please make me a suit?" He says, "I don't make suits anymore. I used to make suits. I'm stopped making suits." So the governor realized he found grace and favor in the eyes of the governor. And the governor respected him. He said, "Okay, if you don't make suits anymore, no problem." And he withdrew his request, and he let him go back home. Now, that time, there was a fire that caused hundreds of people in Shvensian to lose their homes and to be very hungry without any place to go. So the governor was very benevolent, and he offered 100 people to stay at his estate. He also sent 10 wagons of potatoes and vegetables and 2 wagons of flour. And the head of the community, the president of the Jewish community, went with others to thank the governor. And when they arrived at his estate, he said to them, he really appreciates what he's able to do for them. He likes doing this for them. And he says you could take wood from his forests to rebuild everyone's home. He understands that the fire ruined a lot of people's homes. And he was very benevolent, gave a lot of wood from all of his forests to be used to rebuild. And they're very thankful. And then he says, I would really like, in 3 months' time, there's going to be a meeting among all the nobility in this area in Vilna. And I would really like to have a suit made by this Jew in your town of Rabbi Shmuel. If he can make a suit for me, so I would really be happy about that. So when the president of the community came back to town, he told the other They had a gathering among the other dignitaries in town. They all decided together that they have to ask Rabbi Shmuel to make the suit. And Rabbi Shmuel had gotten advice from this passing tzaddik, Rabbi Mordechai, that if a community asks you to do something, you should acquiesce. And therefore, he agreed to make the suit, and the governor was very happy. The governor, I forgot to mention, he promised that in exchange for this suit, he will not only pay Rabbi Shmuel very handsomely, but he will also rebuild the synagogues, the 4 synagogues that had burned in the city. He will rebuild all of those synagogues. And he fulfilled his promise. And not only that, but he also gave Rabbi Shmuel some land, and Rabbi Shmuel was able to support himself very comfortably because of the land and what he did with that, the farm that was given to him by this governor. Now, in the month of Cheshvan, his wife felt that she was pregnant. I forgot to mention that they weren't blessed with, not only they're not blessed with a child, but every time she became pregnant, she lost the child. She had so many miscarriages. And therefore, as soon as she became pregnant, she started to cry because she felt that she was going to lose a child again. And she went to the gravesite of her husband's father, Reb Meir, and she asked him to daven for her. And after that, a few nights later, she has a dream, and this old man comes to her and says to her, "Why are you crying? Why are you crying? It's going to be okay. You're going to have a child." And she wakes up and she still sees this old man next to her, and she tells her husband about it. I can still see that. And her husband said he remembered the third message of Mordechai, who said that when you're going to have a child, and you should name him Yitzchak. And sure enough, Baruch Hashem, she stopped to cry. And as is the theme, as we saw in the video tonight, the thinker will be good. She'll be able to calm down and stop to cry and trust in Hashem. And she sure enough had a child named Reb Yitzchak. And the governor fulfilled his promise. And this Reb Yitzchak was, as I mentioned, he was the Reb Yitzchak mentioned in the story of Rashbatz, who became a chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek, and his son Rabbi Yisrael continued his dynasty, and it was also a chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek. And that is the end of the story for tonight. Have a good vach and only good news.